morning. It is good to see you all. It's a pleasant fall morning, and we're thankful for that. We're thankful for your presence. As has been mentioned, Jim called me over the weekend. I guess it was Friday evening, and he said he wasn't feeling well, and it's even gotten worse. So it is the season for colds and flus. I know many of us, many of the congregation, have been battling that as well. So we're thankful that you're here. We're thankful that you're able to get out. That things are as well as they are, and you're able to, from the first morning's worship, be with us. Thankful for Tony and his. I know he's been battling it, and I think Trudy's been battling it. So he said he's looking for somebody to share that with. So if you have a desire to have it, go see Tony, and he will share that. And I'm sure it would be best to avoid it. I also want to thank you for your willingness to be here this morning and your desire for the truth and your support of the gospel for the congregation here. It is edifying to see each and every one of you here this morning. It's an encouragement to me. I think that's part of our Christian duty, to uphold one another and encourage one another, and each and every one of you have always been an encouragement to me, and I pray that I uphold my part in that matter as well. I think I left my pointer, or my I won't go far without this. We would be stuck on that same blank slide that is there now, and you wouldn't want that. That would be a boring lesson. This morning, if I can get this on. There you go. This morning, I thought it would be good, both today, this morning, and this evening, to talk about, I would describe it as both ends of our journey. This morning, I want to talk about the first end, and depending on your view on life, many of us may have passed that first phase of our life. We're going to focus on maybe the younger audience, the earlier parts of our lives. And then this evening, you decide if it's more applicable, we're going to look at some advice given to those that are not so young, maybe those of us that have a little bit more mileage on us. This evening's lesson is going to be entitled Growing Old Gracefully. Growing Old Gracefully. I think the scriptures have a lot of wisdom, a lot of pearls of wisdom to say about how we ought to age, how we ought to conduct ourselves as we grow older, and I think we want to look at that this evening. Hope you come back. Not that that's your lesson. There's things this morning for us all as well. This morning I want to focus on the exhortation and advice given to the young. The title of this morning's lesson is The Days of Your Youth. And it's taken from the Ecclesiastes writer, Solomon, in his letter as he penned upon many words of wisdom. And if you want to turn to Ecclesiastes, we're going to spend a little bit of time there. We're going to realize that certainly Ecclesiastes had some wise words to say about growing older and about being young and the follies of being young. First of all, I want to remember who Solomon was and what perspective, where he was coming from. Solomon was the third and last king of the United Kingdom. Remember, Saul was the first king, and then David, Solomon's father, was the second. Solomon was the third and the last king of the 12 tribes of Israel in the United Kingdom. After which his son Rehoboam was next in line. Remember the issue with Jeroboam and how he sought to separate that because Jeroboam did not exercise the wisdom of his father, if you know the account. He thought to put things harder on the people, and the people revolted, and Jeroboam led that revolt. And then what we know as the divided kingdoms came about. Jeroboam with the 10 northern tribes and Rehoboam is the southern tribe called Judah. But certainly Solomon was third in line in that kingdom. And there's some other things we want to remember about Solomon as well. As we think about what the scriptures tell us about Solomon, and we cannot know about Solomon without knowing about his wisdom. In 1 Kings chapter 4, I want to read a section there because his wisdom preceded him and around all the nations, all the places that he would go. And in 1 Kings chapter 4, just to show how wise and how great of understanding this man named Solomon, this King Solomon had, I want to turn to 1 Kings chapter 4. Then I want to read just verses 29 through 32. And God, and this shows us where the wisdom comes from, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much and largeness of hearts. Not only was he a wise man, full of understanding, but it says he had a large heart. He was a compassionate fellow. He goes on to say that after talking about his largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore, and Solomon's wisdom exceeded the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. So from the east to the west in Egypt, he was the wisest. He was wiser than all men. Than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Chalco, and Gerda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all nations round about. And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. So, if you've never heard of Solomon, we begin to quickly see how wise he was. And if we have somebody that is so wise, it is critical to glean some truth from him, to learn from him. You ever been around somebody that you really respect that's older in years? You just want to take it in. You just want to sit there and listen and learn and ask questions and find their experiences. We're going to talk about some of Solomon's experiences, both this morning and this evening. Another aspect or attribute of Solomon was he was pretty blessed. We talk about privilege today, and certainly Solomon lived a life of privilege, did he not? As we said, he was a king of not just two tribes, but a king of the 12 united tribes of Israel. And in so being, he had all that he ever wanted. He had a great palace. He had any food he wanted. He had a great education. He had any wife that he wanted. Solomon said that whatever he saw that he wanted, he got. And I want to look at that too as we turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 4, because I think all this comes into play when we set into our study and our lesson of both this morning and this evening, but just understand Solomon's background and his perspective, because these instructions, these exhortations come by lessons learned, if you will. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 4 through 10, the wise man Solomon talks about his background and his experiences and his privilege that he had. In verse 4, we could go on, but we're just going to read a small section, verse 4 through 10. He said, I made me great works. I builded me houses, I planted me vineyards, I made me gardens and orchards, I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruit. I made me pools of water to water therewith, the wood, and to bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in my house, and I also had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasures of kings and all the provinces. I got me men singers and women singers, and the lights of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all the sorts. And so I was great, and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained in me. And listen to this, and whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. So you can read that section, and you can say to yourself, you come to the conclusion that certainly Solomon was a man of privilege. Whatever he wanted, he had. Whatever he had it for a while. He maybe didn't want it anymore. He could throw it away. Whatever his eyes did see, whatever he desired, he got. And in the same passage, Solomon admits the folly of it all. Verse 11 says, Then I looked on the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. And there was no profit under the sun. That's what we want to realize as we study Solomon and the wisdom that he gives us in his book, and glean from it, and learn from it, and apply it to our lives. Although Solomon was wise of understanding, we realize that he was not perfect. He gave himself over to many wives and concubines. He allowed himself to be persuaded into many things. In many things throughout his life, he fell well short. You know, when you think about Solomon and study, and you might ask the question, did he ever figure it out? Did he ever make full application of his wisdom? Many scholars are divided on that. Some scholars feel that through the Old Testament and then the fulfillment of Solomon's porch in the New Testament and other passages that Solomon before his passing repented and really was able to make application to the lessons that he gave. And some think not. But I would suggest to you that regardless of Solomon's outcome, the truth is the truth and wisdom is wisdom. And we can learn from the things that Solomon gave us. So we want to look at a few things this morning. As I said, I entitled the lesson, The Days of Your Youth. I want to turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 11. We're going to read a few verses. We're just going to pull a few little bits of wisdom from this, a few little pearls of wisdom. We won't spend a lot of time on these things, but hopefully it will be applicable for you. And as Paul said to Timothy, the young man Timothy, he said, The things that I commit unto you, you commit unto others, and they'll be able to tell other faithful men also. So if you say, no, I'm too old for this, make application and take these pearls of wisdom and share it with others. Or, my attitude is, age is just a number, it's relative. And I'm young at heart, and I'm going to learn from these things. Because tomorrow is a new day, and we're going to learn from some of these lessons that Solomon passed on to us. I want to take a look at a few of them, a few of his life experiences. And it doesn't matter how old we are. If you look at the picture, it doesn't matter what end of the pew you're sitting on. If you're sitting on the young side of the pew or the old side of the pew, I think these lessons can be applicable to you as well. So let's look at first at Ecclesiastes 11. Starting verse 9. I'm going to read these passages. I'm going to pull out just a few comments. In verse 9 of Ecclesiastes 11, he says, Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that all these things God will bring unto judgment. Therefore, remove sorrow from thy heart, and put away evil from the flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. Verse 1 of chapter 12 is part of this thought. And as we conclude, it's basically a summary of his statements. We want to read verse 1 as well in chapter 12. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. So in these few verses, there's a great valuable lessons here, advice to the young, and I want to look at some of Solomon's pearls of wisdom. In verse 9, first of all, he says, Rejoice in your youth. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. And let your heart be cheerful. Let your heart cheer you. You know, there's nothing wrong with being happy. There's nothing wrong with being joyous. And I think that's part of what he's saying, is take advantage of those times, of the days of your youth, because we all know those are fleeting, and the energy and the excitement and the anticipation and the positive outlook of youth, and to some degree the lack of responsibility of youth, those days will soon end. So he's saying take advantage of it and rejoice and be happy and be thankful for the day that you are in. You know, so many times when we're young, we can't wait to get older. We can't wait to get our driver's license. We can't wait to be, not us, people in the world can't wait to get their cards so they can go to the bars. They can't wait to be 21. They can't wait to vote. They can't wait to get married. They can't wait. Solomon's saying, enjoy the moment. Enjoy your youth. Enjoy the energy and the optimism. You think back before the weights and the responsibilities of this life were upon you. When you were younger and you knew everything, you think about your outlook and your zeal and your excitement for life. And you're going to go out and change the world. You're going to be whatever you want. You're going to be the best. And then somehow life tempers that. What I think Solomon's saying is certainly take advantage of that. But do it in a pure way. Enjoy the innocence of youth. Some of us have grandchildren, great-grandchildren. We look at them and we see the joy and the excitement in their eyes. And we remember that. It took me a while. It took me a while to remember it. But we remember those days. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, sometimes we think that youth is all folly. And I think the Ecclesiastes writer is saying is enjoy that time in its purity and build wholesome relationships and have a heart that is holy. And be happy about being young and don't wish your life away. A godly life for a young person is satisfying and contentment and fulfilling. I want to be careful, though, because we ought not confuse this with a life of revelry, a life of just desiring to do what you want, a reckless youth. Certainly we're not condoning that. We're not encouraging that. You know, there is in some cultures that encouragement of sowing your wild oats, experiencing all that life has to offer, living it up, and throwing caution to the wind. People suggest that that's being free. You know, the Amish have a term called Rumspringa. And that basically is a time when the adolescents can break away from the group and live a somewhat wild life. They can go and live with what they call the English, you and me. They can break away from their sect and they can do things that are frowned upon, and they can be rebellious and against their parents, and in that period they can sow their wild oats. That's not what he's saying. He's saying recognize the value and the opportunities of being young and take advantage of it in a wholesome and a right manner. The exhortation is to be the best you can be and to make the best out of your young years. And how do we do that? We know they're fleeting. How do we do that? Take full advantage of your time if you're young. If you're not so young, encourage others to take full advantage of their time. Ephesians chapter 5 is a passage as we think about the wisdom of Solomon and our youth and the youth of our nation and the youth of our families. Ephesians chapter 5 says that youth is going to be gone, that adolescence is going to be gone, and we have to carefully, but we have to take advantage of it. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 says, "See then that ye walk circumspectly," or what he's saying is walk very carefully in this, "not as fools, but as wise." So when we walk through this life as young people, as we're going through these experiences, he's saying, walk carefully, but you can still enjoy and rejoice in your youth. But be careful, don't be foolish about it. He says, redeeming the time, we're taking advantage of the time because the days are evil. Wherefore, be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. And all those things that Paul says, it almost reminds me of, it makes you wonder whether he's thinking about Solomon. Because he's talking about understanding and wisdom. Rejoice and redeem the time. Philippians chapter 4 talks about the times that we have. And Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 and 5 says, rejoice in the Lord. Solomon said, rejoice in your youth. Paul says here in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4, rejoice in the Lord. And I would say those have to be joined together. They can be not separated in the life of a young Christian. Rejoicing in your youth must mean rejoicing in the Lord and be happy about it. Have you ever run across a young, happy Christian? I'm talking young, college, high school, new convert, the energy they have, the excitement they have, the positive outlook they have. There's nothing wrong with that. Because they're rejoicing in the Lord. He goes on to say in verse 5, let your moderation be known unto all men, because the Lord is at hand. Kim and I were at a bluegrass concert on Friday. First time I've been to one of those, and it was really nice. First thing I saw was, I looked pretty young. With the audience, most of the audience were much older than us. I think I'm trending that way. But within the audience, there was a small group of very young people, high school, just out of high school, and they seemed to be more Mennonite of their background. But we both commented on how nice it was to see them, that young people interested, because bluegrass music doesn't get too wild. But they were there, they were participating. And Kim even mentioned that, there's a group of young boys. And she said, well, young girls don't like those kind of young boys. And that's the truth. But it is encouraging when you see people that are rejoicing in wholesome things. He says, take advantage of that. Paul says to the young man Timothy in 1 Timothy 4 verse 2, he says, let no man despise thy youth. You and I, if we're older, and we look at those younger, we ought not despise them for being young, for being energetic, and having that wishful anticipation of their future. We ought to encourage that, and we ought to help mold that in a godly way. To temper that and help it to be directed in a useful way. Why does he say all this? If you turn back to Ecclesiastes chapter 11, he says, rejoice, enjoy it, appreciate it, appreciate your youth. Let thy heart be cheerful in the days of your youth, and walk in the ways of your heart, follow your heart as long as you walk in the ways of God and in the sight of thine eyes. He says, but know this, in the end of verse 9, but know this, that for all these things, God will bring thee unto judgment. What he's saying is, don't be reckless. Because we still know that young or old, if we are accountable, we will be held responsible for our actions. He's not saying be reckless. He's not saying enjoy a rumspringa and go out and live an ungodly youth. He's saying rejoice in your youth, appreciate it, but do it in a godly and a wholesome way. That's good advice. Next pearl of wisdom is in verse 10. He says, therefore, remove sorrow from your heart. If you have other versions, there'll be other ways it says, but basically he's talking about banishing those things that cause sorrow in your life. Avoid those things, flee from them, those things that could do you harm or cause sorrow in your heart. In this first part, he's talking about those things that are emotional, and he's just giving good advice. Some other versions I looked at list words like anxiety, avoid anxiety, remove anger, remove distress, remove vexation. And certainly, this is a message that young in the world need to hear. Although the world and its pleasures promise us happiness, we know that the world cannot fulfill. There are certain pressures that young people are made to have, to look a certain way, to have what others have, to fit in with others. He's saying, don't let that enter into your heart. Keep anger and keep jealousy, keep the desire to have what others have out of your heart. That worldliness, I would suggest to you, you could argue with me, but I would suggest to you that the worldly view of, and we've been talking about this on Wednesday evenings, the secular view that the world is more and more embracing has led to, in my opinion, the least happy generation of all time. You think about on my street alone where I work, I think there are 3 behavioral health centers. And we're not saying that they're not needed, but we're saying that society has developed many people who are pressured and unable to cope and to deal with the disappointments of this life, incapable of interacting, not being able to be content with what they have. And that's the total opposite of rejoicing. And there is sorrow in their heart, and there is conflict in their heart. An ungodly life, an ungodly society does not lead to a rejoicing spirit. According to the American Psychological Society, back in the year 2000, between the ages of 10 and 24, there were 6.8 suicides per 100,000 people. Per 100,000 people in that age group between 10 and 24. That was in 2000. In 2018, it jumped from 6.8 to 10.7, and that's a 58% increase in 18 years. Young people have sorrow in their heart. And I would suggest to you, when we don't have God in our heart, when we don't train our children to have God in their heart, they will have sorrow in their heart. I have a lot of other things to say, but we'll run out of time already. Psalmist writer says in verse 10 of Psalm 51, create in me a clean heart, O God. We need to work on our young people to create a clean heart. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6 talks about anxiety. And he says, don't be anxious for nothing. And that's easier said than done. But it's something we have to work on. Next thing we want to quickly go through. Removing sorrow from our heart might be thought of as a mental or a internal work. But he also says, put away evil from your flesh. Avoid the physical and the material follies that this world has. And the young people are so susceptible to this as they are able to get out and make their own decisions. I would suggest to you this includes everything from substance abuse to sins of the flesh to mistreatment of those. I can mistreat you now. I've got the power. Manifestation of anger one toward another. Many things that this can be. But he said you have to put those things away. Those things are often folly, and they can lead to pain and conflict. And I would suggest to you that those things that he's suggesting to put away, they oftentimes lead to sorrow and misery throughout one's life. Young people start with alcohol or drugs or those kind of things, and then they build upon and years down the road, they're still struggling with the ill effects of those things that they imbibed in when they were young. The French author, the Brewer, said this about the dangers of our youth influencing our latter years. He says, men spend the first half of their lives making the second half of their lives miserable. What did he mean by that? In those early formative years of youth, we can make decisions in our lives that will have an impact many, many years down the road. Whether it's the joys, the pleasures that we get enticed with, the relationships that we make, the decisions that we make in terms of our friends and our family and our loved ones. The missteps of our youth can lead to a life of trouble. And I think that's what Solomon's saying. Enjoy it, rejoice in it, but realize this. You're going to be judged by it. So therefore, put away the evil from your flesh. Last thing, real quick. Remember your Creator. That's what he says in verse 1 of chapter 12. Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. Remember him now. You know, with all the physical and carnal and worldly things around the young, sometimes they forget the spiritual. You know, you think about your time when you were young. I can remember when I was young. You know, especially before I met Kim. There was a lot of things on my mind. Spiritual things they weren't one of them. I wanted to have fun in school. I liked sports. I liked athletics. School, not so much. I like friends. I had plenty of things filling my life with. I like him. So, and that got me to appreciate and know God. But that's what planning our future and our children and our grandchildren. As they're planning their future, there's a lot going on. What do I like to do in life? What kind of job do I want? What kind of profession do I want? What interests me? What do I want to do the rest of my life? Where do I want to live? Do I want to live in a rural area? Do I want to go to the big city? Who do I want to court? Who do I want to spend the rest of my life with? Who do I really want to engage in a relationship with? There's a lot of things. But don't chart your course without including God. Consider your Creator in your life plans. And I think that's the wisdom that he's giving. As a young person that is laying out their life and their dreams and their aspirations, he's saying you have to remember God and include God and include Christ in your life's business plan. Jeremiah chapter 10 verse 23 says, it is not within man to walk in his own direction or direct his own steps. So many young and old alike make plans without remembering their Creator. And that's, Solomon says, is not wise. When they do, God is often left out and forgotten. So that's our lesson. Remember, youth is of great value. So if you're young, if you feel young today, I'm going to encourage you to spend that youth wisely, the value that God has given you. I'm also going to say this, that maturity is also a precious gem. I might take some convincing tonight, but I'm telling you, maturity is a blessing. And we're going to look at that this evening. We're going to cherish our latter days and see that you have value. Sometimes we get older, we don't realize that there's great value that we have in the church, in the work, in our family's lives. So we're going to look at that. We have so much to offer that as we grow older in training and encouragement and direction. And we want to look at that this evening if the Lord is willing. Come back tonight. We're going to